All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are wading into some deep theological waters to talk about one of the most intense and debated ideas in Christian thought. Seriously, this one gets right to the heart of how we see God, free will, and our own eternal destiny. And let's not beat around the bush. The question is this: are some people created by God for the sole purpose of going to hell? Or some of us, from the very beginning, just designed to fail? It's a shocking question, I know, but it's the one we absolutely have to tackle head on. So, this idea has a formal name, double predestination. But it also has a much more dramatic nickname, one given to it by the very person who championed it. He called it the dreadful decree. So, what does that even mean? Well, double predestination is the belief that God, before the beginning of time, didn't just choose who would be saved, he also actively chose who would be damned. In this view, your final destination, heaven or hell, is locked in. It's already decided, and nothing you do in your life can change it. The guy most connected to this idea is John Calvin, an absolute giant of the Protestant Reformation. For him, everything revolved around God's total power and sovereignty. And this doctrine, double predestination, was just the logical endpoint of that belief. And what's really fascinating is that Calvin himself knew exactly how harsh this sounded. I mean, he's the one who called it dreadful. He admitted it was a tough pill to swallow, but in his mind, if God is truly all-powerful and all-knowing, then this had to be the truth. So you might be wondering, where does an idea like this even come from? Well, its supporters argue that it's not just some philosophical theory. They believe it's right there in the Bible, pointing to one chapter in particular as their foundational proof. And that foundation is Romans chapter 9. For centuries, this chapter has been a theological battleground, a place where people find support for completely opposite views on how salvation works. For those who believe in double predestination, a line like this is Exhibit A. When they read vessels of wrath made for destruction, they take it pretty literally that God actually creates certain people for the specific purpose of being damned to show his power. And then there's this stunner, a quote about two brothers, Jacob and Esau. The argument goes that since God said this before they were even born, it proves his choice is totally independent of our actions. He simply loves one and, well, hates the other. It's not based on merit, it's just his call. But hold on, that is not the only way to read these passages. Not by a long shot. In fact, there's a really powerful counter-argument that centers on one of the biggest ideas of all: human free will. And this is where it gets so compelling, because the Bible itself seems to hold this tension. On one hand, you have verses like, he hardens the heart of whomever he wills, which sounds pretty deterministic. But then you have other verses that say God wills everyone to be saved. So which is it? How can both be true? Well, the Catholic approach, for example, tries to solve this puzzle by focusing on our cooperation. The idea is that, yes, faith is a total gift from God. You can't earn it. But like any gift, you have to actually accept it. You have to freely say yes to it. And this whole idea is summed up perfectly by St. Augustine, a theologian that Calvin himself really admired. Augustine said, "God created us without us. We didn't have a choice in being born. But he did not will to save us without us," meaning our free participation is a crucial part of the story. This brings us to a really helpful concept called underdetermination. It sounds complicated, but it's simple. It just means that the same piece of evidence, in this case a Bible verse, can actually support more than one conclusion. The text doesn't force you into one interpretation. There's room for other valid readings. And if we apply that idea back to Romans 9, you can see how it works. That phrase, Esau I hated, the other interpretation says this is a common ancient expression that just means loved less, and that it's about their nation's historical roles, not their personal eternal fates. And vessels of wrath? This view says it's not about God creating them for hell, but about people who prepare themselves for that end by rejecting God's grace. See? Same words, totally different meanings. You know, when you really get down to it, this whole debate isn't just about a few verses. It's about two fundamentally different portraits of what God is actually like. So on one side, you have a God whose ultimate power is shown through absolute decrees. He chooses some and passes over others, and that's just how it is. But on the other side, you have a God who sends out a universal invitation to everyone. In this view, God's plan is so brilliant and powerful that it actually weaves in every single person's free choice. And as you can imagine, this leads to some pretty major criticisms of double predestination. Critics say it kind of makes God the author of evil, right? Because he's the one deciding who will sin and be damned. It also seems to let humanity off the hook for its own choices and can paint a picture of God as a kind of capricious tyrant. And of course, it seems to fly in the face of all those verses that say God wants everyone to be saved. Okay, here's a way to think about the alternative view. Back in 1984, the Chicago Bulls chose Michael Jordan. It was their choice, their election. But that act of choosing didn't automatically win them 6 championships. Jordan still had to say yes, sign the contract, show up for practice, and play his heart out. Being chosen was just the beginning. His free cooperation was everything. And this all brings us back to the biggest mystery of all, the one that sits at the heart of this whole thing. If God exists outside of time and already knows every choice we'll ever make, does that mean we aren't really free? Or is there a way for God's perfect knowledge and our genuine freedom to exist at the same time? That is the profound question this whole debate leaves us with.